I wanted to start off this final hour by saying again what I said at the top of the show to start today. Thank you. I think because of you guys, 2024 has been one of the most monumental years in American history. And if you think about what we have all just experienced together, just since June, Joe Biden gets obliterated by Donald Trump on June 27th in the presidential debate. Late July, June, was it July 13th? Trump comes within a quarter of an inch in Butler, Pennsylvania, of having his head blown off on live television. Mercifully, by the grace of God, his ear is clipped and he survives. Can you imagine how much different the world is today if that assassin had been successful? July 21st, Trump suddenly finds out he's got a new opponent because Joe Biden drops out. Kamala Harris gets elevated. They will be writing books about 2024 long after all of us are gone as one of the craziest presidential elections and years ever. And I feel incredibly fortunate that we all got to spend that year together, that we were on, Buck and I, doing our best to fight the good fight for 15 hours a week. And I appreciate all of you. And I've been thinking a lot about the future, really, as a dad or a granddad or a mom or a grandma. I know that a lot of you think about this as well. But in particular, I had a lot of time to think on the trip that I made to Israel. And one of the things that has stood out to me about 2024 is good and evil is real. And I really think it's important to understand that. Because one of the things we learned in 2024 that is alarming for me, and I think we have to fix in the years ahead, is a lot of our young people have lost the ability to distinguish between good and evil. And I know it's a holiday season, and I want you to think about this with me if you would. I wanted to save this final hour to have this conversation with all of you, because I know a lot of you are going to be sitting around your Christmas tables, variety of different ages, having conversations across generations. There are going to be a lot of young people, and there are some signs that are really positive, I think, about young people in this nation. I'll give you a positive before I dive into the things that have me a bit troubled. Young men in this country showed up and voted for Donald Trump in enormous numbers. The biggest, according to the Wall Street Journal, swing in voting of any group was young men went from Biden plus 14 in 2020 to Trump plus 14 in 2024. Now, there are a variety of different polls out there, but I'm specifically referencing the voter analysis from the Wall Street Journal. That's a seismic 28-point swing. Young men, I believe, are done with the BS, and they realize they've been lied to. And I think a lot of young women are starting to see it too. For COVID, imagine if you were 16 years old and suddenly they shut down your high school and you didn't get to go to prom and you didn't get to finish your basketball season or your soccer season and you didn't get to hang out with your friends that summer because they shut down all the different hiking trails and they shut down the public basketball courts. They shut down the beaches, the swimming pools. And then they told you, hey, Joe Biden, sharp as a tack. You're profoundly distrustful now of the government at large. And I think this is going to be a big story going forward. But also, here's what troubles me. Young people, and I don't think we talked about this, but according to a poll, 41 to 40% thought that the murder of that United Healthcare CEO was justified. Young people on many college campuses, from the East Coast at Columbia to the West Coast at UCLA, overwhelmingly set up protests on campus to say that the Palestinians were the force for good and the Jewish people were the force for evil in the Middle East. If you cannot distinguish between good or evil, we are in a really dangerous place as a society. And coming back from Israel, I want to share some of the stories, and I'm putting it in my own words, but producer Ali was there with me, and Andrew, who is our tech engineer, was there for a lot of these conversations as well. There were 3 experiences with Israelis that I had that really stood out, and I want to tell you each of their stories, what I learned from them, and why I think it's important in the United States. Because some people I read hop in every now and then mentions, they're like, why should I care what goes on in Israel? Maybe some of you out there of that opinion. Maybe some of you are misguided and you actually think that Israel is the force for evil in the Middle East. Maybe you've consumed content making those arguments. I want to tell you that what happens in Israel, I believe, echoes with what happens with Western civilization going forward. And one of the profound evils that has taken root in this country that we have to destroy, I believe, is the idea that America is not a force for good, that our history is evil, and as a result, that any of our founding fathers or the documents that they created, whether it's Declaration of Independence, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's the Bill of Rights, all of it should be destroyed because they don't have the moral legitimacy to have created it. Understand that's what attacking this country's founding is actually about. It's about delegitimizing our history to such an extent that we got to rename Washington, D.C., or we got to tear down the Jefferson Memorial because Thomas Jefferson happened to have owned slaves, or all of these different attacks, which are predicated on the idea that we should define people not by the best thing they did, but by the worst thing they did. And to me, what Judeo-Christian culture largely coalesces around is the idea of aspiring to be better versions than ourselves and offering people forgiveness and redemption when they are the worst version of themselves. Now, every single person out there listening to me knows that inherently in all of your lives, if people in the public arena defined you by the worst thing that you ever did, you would look like a profoundly awful human being. If every single person listening right now, if the worst thing that you ever did suddenly went public on social media and everybody saw it, you would be defined in this modern era as an awful human being. And you might go viral for it, and everybody would judge you based on it. And I don't care who you are, every single one of you listening to me right now, you got something in your mind, you're like, oh man, if that went public, I would have been done for. Maybe it happened 20 years ago. Maybe it happened 40 years ago. Maybe it happened last week. You know it to be true. That's what the woke mind virus is doing. They want to define us, drag us all the way back down to the worst, most base version of ourselves and say, this is who we are. To me, what Judeo-Christian values are about is understanding that bad things can be done, but elevating humanity to the best versions of ourselves. When I go to Washington, D.C., and I look out and I see the Washington Monument, and I see the Jefferson Memorial, and I see the Lincoln Memorial, and I see the MLK Memorial and the World War II Memorial, I don't think about the worst thing that any of the individuals involved in those places, the Vietnam War Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, the new World War I Memorial. I think about collectively the best version of ourselves and what we can accomplish. That, to me, is what Western civilization is, embracing the best from the past, understanding that none of us are perfect, but that we can aspire to a higher version of ourselves, and that should be the goal. And that's one of the lessons, one of the things that kept resonating for me as I traveled through Israel, which in many ways is the birthplace of religion and also, to a large extent, the birthplace of civilization that area is. When we come back, I want to tell you about 3 stories that I heard that I found to be profoundly moving that I think will impact all of you from the Holy Land here as we get closer to Christmas. I'd encourage you to keep listening, grab this. I hope these stories you'll be able to share with your friends and family as we move closer to Christmas. And I'm thankful that I was able to go to Israel, a place where many people out there dream of going your whole lives, thanks to one of our sponsors, the IFCJ. That's the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. I talked about the history of Judeo Christian relations and the aspirational goals of both of those religions and trying to rise to a better version of yourself and continue to be a better version of yourself in the years ahead. That's what the IFCJ does. From providing bomb shelters, fortified vehicles, hospital that can convert underground to be able to protect everybody in an ER that literally can be taking place inside of a parking garage. They're also providing Hanukkah food boxes filled with necessities to those in need. What they do, I'm blown away by every single day. You can join and help the message of Christians and Jews and the unity that both bring by giving the hope and answered prayers this holiday season. Show your support to Israel by donating today at supportifcj.org. That's supportifcj.org. You can also call to give at 888-488-IFCJ. That's 888-488-IFCJ. Supportifcj.org. Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. I'm talking about Western civilization. I'm talking about Judeo-Christian values here a few days before Christmas and the experience that I had in Israel. And so, on Christmas Eve, we're going to have a special interview with a tour guide who took us around the old city of Jerusalem for thousands of years. That has been the central location of incredibly historic Christian, Jewish, and Muslim religious locations. And so I think you guys are going to enjoy that. But I'm talking about some of the things that I learned based on conversations that we had. And one of the stories that stuck with me that was so profound, and you guys know I'm awful at pronouncing names, so I may screw this up. Malchi Shem Tov is the father of one of the kids that's currently being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. He was kidnapped, his son was, at the Nova Festival. Now, for those of you who don't remember, the Nova Festival is kind of like a Bonnaroo. It's kind of like a Burning Man. It's kind of like a Coachella. One of these big old school, it would have been a Woodstock, one of these large music festivals where tons of kids come, to a large extent, 18 to 35-year-old, but a lot of really young people. And right now, the wound is still very fresh there. But when you walk onto those grounds, they have big placards that they have put in place with everybody's image on them who was murdered that day, over 400 people. And also, many of them were kidnapped by Hamas when they came across the border and began to kill people because they were Jewish on October 7th, which was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. And they were killed entirely because they were Jewish, nothing else, no other reason. To me, it is the most profoundly evil act that I have seen in recent history. Certainly 9/11 was our version of what happened on October 7th, but what distinguishes what happened to Israel from 9/11 is they took hundreds of hostages. And I talked with this gentleman whose son has been held hostage for over 430 days. And when I say you look into his eyes, he does not look like he has slept for 430 days. He said his son, who was 20 when he was kidnapped, turned 21 and now 22 in captivity. Can you imagine what it would be like to have in this holiday season your son or daughter, young, healthy, effervescent, went to a music festival, and has now been held for over 430 days as a hostage simply because they happen to be Jewish. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about his story when we come back and a couple of the other stories that to me are so important in this time of the holy season. Look, it's late in the gift processing and purchasing cycle. Not too late for you to still get a great gift from Rapid Radio. With a Rapid Radio walkie-talkie, you can talk to one family member with the push of a button or every family member at the same time. The distance between you and the intended connection point doesn't matter. It can be anywhere in the United States, so you can talk to relatives and friends close by and far away. For a limited time, go to rapidradios.com. You'll get up to 60% off free UPS shipping for Michigan, plus a free protection bag. Add code radio, and you can get an extra 5% off. That, again, the website, rapidradios.com. Use code radio. Great gift idea. Do it today. Breaking news. A lot of people are injured after a car plowed into a crowd at a German Christmas market in what is suspected to be a terror attack. I'm reading from the New York Post. This just happened. A car plowed into a group of people shopping at a Christmas market in eastern Germany Friday, leaving many wounded in what officials are saying was a targeted attack. Driver was immediately arrested after what local outlets are calling a terror attack in the city of Magdeburg, according to the German news outlet Bild. So, more details of this are going to come out. There's been other attacks in Christmas markets like this, but again, this one happening in Germany, and it ties in exactly with what I'm talking about, good and evil. If you attack someone because of their religion, you're evil, period. If Israel put down their weapons tomorrow, the country wouldn't exist in a week. If every Middle Eastern country put down their weapons, there would be peace in the Middle East immediately. I was talking as we went to break about the dad whose son was in captivity for his 21st and his 21st and 22nd birthday. He said on that day at the Nova terror attack, they were texting with their son. And they also had, as many of you probably do with your kids, an ability to track their cell phones on their own cell phone. And they said he suddenly went silent. Imagine what it's like to know that there's a terror attack underway at a music festival that your son or daughter went to. They're texting you that they can hear gunfire, that there are terrorists approaching them. And then suddenly you don't hear anything at all from them. That's what happened to tons of Jewish families on October 7th. And that dad told me, he said, all we could do was just look at the phone. And they saw the phone moving. And they had been talking with their son about where he needed to go and how he could get away and giving him advice and telling him that there were terrorists everywhere, thousands of them that had poured across the border. And they said suddenly the phone started to move. And first they thought, oh, this is great. He's gotten in a car. He's getting away. And as they were watching that phone, suddenly their son's phone started going right toward Gaza. And they were furiously, they said, texting him, you're going the wrong way. Turn around. They thought he was lost. They could watch his phone speeding across the farmland there, getting closer and closer to Gaza. And then they saw it go in to Gaza, and it vanished. And they have not heard from their son in 430 days. Hamas took him because he's Jewish. They don't know if he's dead. They don't know if he's alive. The last thing they saw, the last contact they had with their son was his cell phone going into Gaza. They desperately hoped maybe somebody stole the phone, maybe somebody was running off with it, and then they found out that he was a terrorist. Talk about good and evil. Look into someone's eyes who is a parent. I said, can you sleep? He said, no. Basically hasn't been able to sleep for 430 days. That's evil. Good and evil exists. It's important to call it out. Talked with a mom, Leora bin Sur. She came to Nova and met us. She had a gun on her waistband, handgun. Sat down and told me her story. On October 7th, she was in a hospital. She had just given birth to her third child one day before, October 6th, 2023. They all woke up that morning with missiles being fired all over Israel. They were all told to go into their bomb shelters. She was texting with her husband. Her husband was back at their home with their two older kids, young kids, all 5 and under. Slowly from inside the hospital with a baby nursing on her, she became aware that terrorists had come into Israel and were inside of her husband's kibbutz, the village, murdering people. Her mom was there. She was texting with her mom. Grandma was in town, as grandmas are, because there'd been a baby born, and she wanted to be able to help with those younger kids. Her husband, they didn't have guns at that time. Her husband stood by the door with the biggest butcher knife he could find to try to defend the kids if the terrorists came in. I want you to think about that. Good and evil is real, okay? And it's emotional to hear these stories. She was texting with her husband and with her mom. There's nobody there to protect them. People being murdered left and right next to them because they're Jewish. Nobody's coming. She called her brothers who had been in the IDF. Every 18-year-old in Israel just about serves their country because they have to, because people want to kill them because they're Jewish. She texted her brothers, said, "Get your guns. They're going to kill my kids and my husband and my mom, our mom. You have to get there." Brothers got in the car, loaded up with all the guns they could get, rushed there. There's no protection. People being murdered left and right. They get to the door. Mercifully, they get her husband and those kids out. They save them. They go back to look for mom, grandma. Grandma is 65 years old in a different room, different house there. Her sons found her, murdered, riddled with bullets. And when they found her, think about this for a minute. She was holding a picture of her grandkids. They killed her because she was Jewish. Evil is real. I talked with that mom, 3 kids, all under 5. And I said, because I saw she was wearing that gun on her hip, she said she's never left the house without that gun on her hip since. Think about that. In the hospital with a baby, she said she thought it's just going to be the two of us now, her and that baby. She thought her husband was going to be killed. She thought her kids were going to be killed. Her mom was killed. That just happened last year. Over 1,000 people murdered because they were Jewish. I just told you at the Christmas market in Germany, somebody just drove a car through it. American college kids protested and said the Jews are the bad guy. A lot of young people are saying, hey, that United Healthcare CEO, he got murdered. Oh, the killer's the good guy. A country is in profound difficulty and trouble when there is not a recognition that good and evil still exist. And it's even more dangerous when there is an inability to tell between the two. And what happened there, it's already happened here, right? On 9/11, we know it. There are people in this country right now who want to kill us because they are evil. And they believe that the way that we live is evil. And so when people say, oh, well, you didn't go into Gaza, I don't have to. I don't have to. Because I know what Hamas did on that day. And they would kill every Jew in the world if they could, and they would celebrate while they did it. That is evil. And I understand it's not every Muslim person. And if you judge anybody based on their religion, you're an imbecile. There are awful, evil Christians, and there are awful, evil Jews, and there are awful, evil Muslims, and everybody else, right? And atheists, whatever religion you choose or don't choose to support. But good and evil is real. And when you stare upon it, it's important to call it out. I'll give you another story from inside of that kibbutz, and then I'm going to tell you one more to finish up. Do you know why they have the bomb shelters there? It's not to protect from people running around with AK-47s riddling bodies with bullets. It's because all the time they shoot rockets into Israel from other countries. And so on that morning when they started to shoot rockets, they did that intentionally because they wanted everybody in those bomb shelters. All these homes have to have bomb shelters. Think about how crazy that is. All of them have to have bomb shelters. And you know what they did? They went in and lit those homes on fire because they knew the people were then going to have to run out of the bomb shelters. If you walk around to many of these kibbutzes, they're burned out. They waited outside until moms and dads and their kids came out, and they executed everybody as they came out, or they took them hostage. I stood in front of one house where a mom and dad were shot to death trying to hold the door of their bomb shelter closed, and they had 3 little kids behind them that all died of smoke inhalation because their home was burned down. If you got young kids or you got grandkids, imagine being parents holding those doors with everything you got while the terrorists are firing at you. You're murdered when they found them there holding the door, and all of your kids die of smoke inhalation behind you after watching you get murdered. That happened all over the border with Gaza. I know it's easy to say, oh, well, that's the Middle East. Why should I care about it? Israel is the front line of Western civilization in this country. If you do not stand with Israel, then you are standing against Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, basic human rights for men and women around the world. And if they fall, they're going to come for other countries. You want to talk about the danger of what might happen next. They're coming. They believe that we are evil. We're not. Again, that analogy is perfect. If Israel put down their weapons, they would all be dead tomorrow. If the Middle East put down their weapons, there would be peace. Israel's the good guy. We've got to stand with them. When we come back, I'll tell you one more story rolling into Christmas that I think is really important. And I certainly appreciate all you guys listening to me. And I understand it's going into Christmas, but I think these are important conversations. People say, hey, I was expecting you to tell me, like, what's a better movie, Home Alone or, the Christmas Story? The answer is Christmas Story, by the way, although Home Alone is good. But I know so many of you are going to be with friends and family over the holidays. I want you to be sharing these stories with the kids that are home from college that, frankly, are knuckleheads, and a lot of them don't know any better. And I want that image with you as you get ready to be with your friends and family to think about that alignment between Christians and Jews. I mean, I just told you there's a car terror attack just happened in Germany. Evil is real. And the importance of being able to distinguish between good and evil is maybe the most foundational element of the United States, the most profoundly, I think, good country to ever exist in the history of the world. When they try to tell us that our history is awful, when they try to denigrate us and tear down our founding fathers and our leaders, it's about stripping away our moral authority to see evil and call it out. That's what they're doing. It's important to understand this. I want to finish with a story that I thought was compelling, powerful, and perfect going into Christmas. So I'm talking about my trip to Israel, the Holy Land. On Christmas Eve, we're going to have an interview with a history guide who told us all about the Western Wall, all about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Muslim holy sites too, all of it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. But there was a man named Nir Metzger, 48-year-old. Dad was kidnapped and murdered, stood inside of a bomb shelter for 7 hours while his neighbors were being murdered, hoping that his son and daughter and his niece, they would survive. They did. And I stood on a concrete platform with him, which was the only remaining part of a home that was burned. And the people who lived there, the man and woman, were murdered. And we stood there and we looked out and you could see Gaza in the distance. And by the way, Israelis have a great sense of humor, oftentimes, about the danger that they face, as people who deal with danger often do. It's a bit macabre. I said, how in the world, why do you live here? Why do you live here? And they said, other than the rockets, it's amazing. Other than people trying to kill you and firing the rockets, it's amazing. But as I stood there with Nir Metzger, I said, you going to come back here? He said, yeah, I want to rebuild. I said, why? He said, I want Hamas to look over here at the village they tried to destroy, and I want them to see it bigger, better, more profoundly successful than it ever was before. And I want them to understand they failed, we won. And I just thought it was such a profound message. Good will triumph over evil if enough people pursuing good are active. I hope all of you pursue good this holiday season. Thanks from all of us. Merry Christmas.